Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are here today to talk about Wheel of Fortune. I know, I bet that's not right. Wheel of Time, episode 1. That was a good joke.
That was terrible.
You're shaking your head at me, but that was a great joke.
Because it was awful.
I'll be honest, if I could remember the tune of the Wheel of Fortune music, I'd have hummed it.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head either.
In my head, all I'm hearing is catchphrase, and I know it's not Wheel of Fortune. It's catchphrase I'm hearing. But yeah, anyway, welcome everyone. New Amazon show, Wheel of Time. This is season 1, episode 1. It's called Leavetaking. We'll start spoiler free. We'll give you a warning before spoilers because it is an episode 1, and we're reviewing this because it was voted high up in the priority list by the patrons at the $10 tier, who vote on the pilot sort of priority for the month. And
that's what you're reviewing. I'm reviewing it because I was interested because fantasy show.
Yeah, well, this came in. This actually topped out the priority list, so this had to be done. If I only did one pilot this month, this was the one that had to be done. So I would like to take this opportunity to tell all the patrons how much I despise them at this moment in time for making me watch this.
I love you all.
This...
Joe, I don't think I'm going to spoil anything by assuming your opinion here. 30 seconds into this show, where it opens with the monologue, basically, like the history monologue, I was like, oh, Pete's going to absolutely despise this show. I love it.
You're not wrong. I was basically...
literally, like, in that first minute, I was like, I know exactly how he's going to feel.
That opening speech, which I didn't even hear half of because it wasn't... I was like, shit, this is mixed lower than I was expecting. Why is Amazon's audio volume like 10 lower than everyone else's? Get up.
I have that problem with Apple. I have to, generally my TV sits at like 18 to 20. When I watch Ted Lasso, I have to watch it at like 35.
Alternatively, YouTube is far louder than everything else on my Apple TV. I don't know what it is, but I have to half my volume from normal to get to a reasonable amount.
It's standardization.
I don't know what's going on. I suspect it's something to do with YouTube just being rough and ready stereo that everyone's using versus possibly, all these big mixes that everyone else does.
Probably that compression as well, because a lot of the things you'll be watching will have nice uncompressed audio, which tends to be quieter. YouTube compression will just knock it up and crank it.
Yeah, that's possible. So yeah, it's a fantasy show. The patrons knew I was going to hate it, and they voted for it anyway. So here we are. How would I describe this? So Rosamund Pike is like some witch lady. She bends light or something and uses it like telekinesis. Seems
to be. I could be wrong, but it felt kind of elemental to me because there's a point at the end where it's like controlling fire. Then there's a bit like where she's controlling like some earth. I'm like, it felt a little bit elemental based, but I could be wrong.
And she's looking for a chosen one, because
aren't they always?
The dragon is woken again, and because everyone in this universe reincarnates, so at least that's what they believe. They don't like. It doesn't seem like. It's not like when someone comes back, they know it's them again. It's not like, oh, you're my dead grandfather. In
fact, quite the opposite, where they seem to go, no one ever remembers their previous lives, but there's just obviously what they believe.
It's what they believe. And so Rosamund Pike's looking for a chosen one. The dark one, the super villain of the show, who is only mentioned by name in this really, is rising again. So the chosen one needs to be found because that's the only one who's going to be able to stand against him. And for some reason, Rosamund Pike has a feeling that it's like one of 4 people, but she doesn't know which one of the 4 people it is. And I don't know if the show ever really made it clear how she even has it narrowed down this much.
I was a little confused on that as well. She seems to be able to know when it's not someone, because we have a cold open where there's some guy and she's like, no, it's not him.
Honestly, obviously we're not talking about this sort of stuff yet, but this is like the second scene of the show. Like, there's a monologue from her. She's putting on her cloak. We must go find the chosen one. Off to Isengard. That's a Lord of the Rings thing, right?
That is Lord of the Rings, yes. Isengard.
So yes, that's the thing. And then, but we get this scene where basically it seems like some women who have similar powers to her are chasing a man because this power is only meant to be with the women. And they chase this man down and they kill him because he's somehow tapped into the power, and he makes it filthy because he uses it. And it's just a cold open to establish, the sort of the dynamic between who has this power, who doesn't. They seem more vicious than Rosamund Pike. But it's this thing where they chase him down and they sort of block a big ravine with rocks with their powers, and then they kill him. And this scene, I thought, looked like cheap shit. Like, the entire thing was overly bright. It just looked like it was a soap opera to me.
Yeah, and that's weird because I don't think the rest of the show or the rest of the episode looks particularly cheap.
Yeah, it looks a bit generic. Like, it's like a lot of, like,
It's generic TV fantasy,
yeah.
I'll grant. But I don't think it looks cheap necessarily.
It had this feeling of just like a lack of style. There was a lack of like punch and style in it. And then that kind of extended. There was a lot of like shots of vistas and like mountains and like forests and stuff. And you could kind of always feel like which parts of the image were static, because part of it was fake, or part of it was a static image which they have sort of like put together with a little bit of CG or with a little bit of actual movement. And you always kind of felt this disconnect with it. So there was kind of like a weird fake sheen to a lot of it as well. So right away I was feeling, even though this is meant to be like one of Amazon's biggest budgeted things that they've done, it also had this feeling of like, I can see all these weird corners being cut.
There's also a weird element to this in the sense that, like I said, this is fairly well budgeted from what we know. It's clearly like they want this to kind of be, all right, we're filling that Game of Thrones void, right? They want some of that audience.
Uh-huh.
It seems very strange to me that they've got their Lord of the Rings show coming next year.
Mm-hmm.
That is, from what I gather, even significantly higher budgeted than this. That's where they're going to be targeting that Game of Thrones audience a lot more, I'm assuming. It makes this kind of feel like it was a backup plan in some ways.
A backup plan? I wonder if they just got the rights to this first, and then they just didn't. They chose not to like cancel it. They chose to keep going with it, even though they got Lord of the Rings. They said, "No, we'll still do it." It's just like you say, it's a backup.
This is a pretty beloved series of books as well, which I've wanted to read, but I don't, because interested obviously falls right into my wheelhouse of what I read. The author who did most of the books actually died before he finished the story, and rather than leave it unfinished, Brandon Sanderson, another big fantasy author, came in and finished off the last couple, working from notes and rough drafts, I believe. But I despise Brandon Sanderson's writing style, so I'm like, I don't want to read 80% of this story, get really into it, and then have to finish it off in the style written by someone who I know I dislike. So it kind of put me off reading it.
That's fair. So we have our 4 sort of young 20-somethings who are potentially the chosen one.
I think the whole point is they are almost exactly 20, right? They were born 20 years ago, nearly to the day.
Yeah, I remember something to that vague effect, but I couldn't remember the exact number, which is why I said 20-something. I was covering myself by leaving it open. But yeah, and like 2/3 of this episode is just establishing who's in a couple with who, and who's like feeling awkward with who, what the life is like in the small village in the mountains. Like that's really what the first 2/3 of this episode are. And there's some teases, like the idea that establishes that there's this group of women that if a woman devotes themselves to this group, they kind of like, I don't want to say it's like becoming a nun, but it's kind of, it's like they get separated from civilization. They can no longer do normal things. They're now part of this group, and it seems like this is how they also tap into the powers and stuff like that.
Yeah, from what I gathered from it, it was more of a, they're still part of society because they're still part of the village.
They have a function in society, but like the main girl we meet, like she's given this offer, which would mean like if she takes this offer to go like higher up the rank, she's going to be moving away from everyone.
It's kind of like priesthood, right? In that, they're there, they're part of the community, but they are inherently separate, and they don't have relationships like everyone else does. Yeah,
it's like they still have a function in society, but they are definitely, you can't just have a relationship with one, or I mean, that's the main thing that seems to be the issue here. But she's in a relationship with
these two in particular. Yeah.
Yeah, she's in a relationship with one of the main dudes, who I'm going to refer to as Ginger Anakin, and he.
I want to say his name was Rand, but I could be wrong.
He looks like Anakin Skywalker with ginger hair.
I don't think he does.
Attack of the Clones era Anakin, he does. Come on, that's what he looks like. That's what he's got going.
Sure.
So you got him, and then you got his two friends, one of whom has got a beard. Well, actually, they both have beards now that I think about it. But so the other one, the final one, is like a bit of a scoundrel who, like, you know, pickpockets and like cares about his little sisters, and his parents are kind of awful, and we're kind of like showing him. So he's kind
of a bit of a gambling problem.
Yeah, he's got a gambling problem. He's a bit morally iffy, but at the same time, his heart's in the right place. So you kind of want to, like, at least the idea in theory is that you kind of want to root for him anyway. The other guy that I was kind of struggling to describe, I feel like he does have something by the end of the episode. He's defined by something that happens later in the episode, but he doesn't really have much to him before that point. So that's kind of your four potentials.
There is, yeah, and they're clearly okay, these are the main group. I think the episode does a fairly good job of kind of establishing them all well enough that I've got in the space of this episode, I've got an idea of who they all are, at least vaguely.
Yeah, I can't argue with that, I suppose.
Which I think that's, for me at least, especially in a big fantasy epic like that, it's good to have that grounding right from the start. Where I'm not going to pretend to care about any of these characters yet. I haven't spent anywhere near enough time with any of them to remotely do that. But I've got an idea of who they are, at least, which just gives it this grounding to kind of build the rest of the show around, which will help, especially when you have all these fantastical elements.
I think a lot of the relationship stuff just kind of bogged it down for me in terms of like getting into any of these characters. Maybe the bigger problem is though, so Rosamund Pike shows up in this small village. She believes the chosen one is here, but she doesn't know who, and everyone kind of reacts to it. It's actually kind of Witcher-esque, like the way everyone kind of like stops and like, oh shit, it's a Witcher. Like that's kind of how it feels.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. She's got a reputation, not personally, but through her organization.
Yeah, and like I think I guess something. I feel like something is missing here in terms of like just one element I think had to be focused on more so we could understand one thing better, so that could be our anchor for the story in this like first 2/3 of the episode. Because so much of it was like, okay, they keep talking about finding this chosen one, but it's not really until the end of the episode that she casually mentions why. And when she does mention why, it's kind of like, oh, it's just there's a big bad guy. Okay, this kind of like is the simplest basic
fantasy 101
terms that you could have described it as. If I ask, what honestly, like, I like Rosamund Pike and other things. I think she's kind of terrible in this first episode.
I think she's a bit flat. I wouldn't go as far as say terrible.
She feels like an actor who's taken a job, thinks a lot of what she's doing is stupid. She's going through the motions, she's doing it, but there's moments when she starts using her powers properly later on in the episode where she's doing all these arm movements and whooshing around and stuff, and the whole time she just looks kind of silly and like she kind of hates herself a little bit. Like, what am I doing? I'm standing in front, presumably she's standing in front of a green screen or just in the location and doing all these arm movements, and I get the feeling that she's not super in love with this material. That was the vibe I was getting.
She's probably there for the payday, let's be honest. Because she is the biggest name attached to this show right now, and I imagine she can get a reasonable salary out of that. Because I think a lot of the marketing has kind of focused around the fact that, she's the recognizable name.
Oh, no, it definitely has.
Like I said, we've seen her in other stuff that she is, phenomenal in.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, like, where the episode goes, there's a lot of action in the last third of the episode, and to be honest, I was kind of bored by it for the most part. Like, it kind of went on far too long, and it was kind of samey. It didn't really feel like it kind of presented it more like a battle sequence of like an army invading someplace instead of, like, I don't know, treating them like really scary enemies per se, even though by their nature they should be scary enemies because they're like not human. They're, what was it, Trollocs or something they called them?
Trolloc, yeah. I think I went in and out during this, in that there were points of it I thought were really strong, and those tended to be the bits where it was following one of the characters, and it was quite interesting. The bits where it was just like, here's some generic fighty bits. Yeah, there was a bit too much of that. I think the bit where there's a bit where we follow, as you called him, Ginger Anakin, and his dad. That bit I think was quite good. The bit where the scoundrel one goes back out into the fight, I think that's pretty good as well. Other bits, not so much. It's not that they were bad, but I think they were just like, yeah, they were fine. There's a lot of it. I agree with that.
Yeah. And I realize we're kind of talking about everything here, even though we've not really been into spoilers yet. And again, it's like a lot of pilots. There's not a lot to say there's spoilers of in this first episode. It's because it's very much like the premise of this show clearly is that these four potential chosen ones, I should say, are going to go with Rosamund Pike and her bodyguard dude, and like go searching and just sort of do a journey of self-discovery and like training and discovering which one of them
really is the chosen one.
But I'm sure the other three will also be important still, even if they aren't the chosen one.
I will be shocked if it's like the whole point isn't like, oh, but look, we're all stronger together.
Oh yes, we're all the chosen one. We're the quadrants of the chosen one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I could totally see that being the case.
I don't think it'll be quite so literal as that, but yeah. That tends to be how these stories go, and that's okay. That's part of the genre.
Yeah. Maybe if the genre did some new things once in a while, maybe I'd be more excited about it.
I'm sure it does, that you just don't see because you see fantasy and you go, nope, I'm out.
Well, I mean, we always talk about a first episode needing a hook at the end, and I felt like this one didn't really have a hook. It just kind of it went back to her Pike monologuing at the end about the wheel of time keeps spinning no matter what, and we must all.
I think it's probably quite telling that Amazon released 3 episodes on the first week. Whenever they've done this in the past.
Oh, I didn't even realize this was weekly after.
Yeah, I think it is. I believe it is anyway.
I assumed the whole season was there. I didn't even check. I just assumed.
I didn't double check. Maybe I'm wrong. I thought there was.
Oh, you're probably right. I assumed it was all 10. I just thought they released it as normal, but
which is why I'm not like letting this off for not having a hook at the end of the first episode. I think that's still possibly the most important point to have your hook. You want me to come back for episode 2?
Yeah, just because it's available right now, you still have to earn me wanting to give my time to it. So
definitely
hook me.
And I agree that this opens with just the by opens I mean the show, the first episode is just the show. It's the premise. There is no new hook by the end, but yeah, it is just 3 episodes up now. So I'm wondering if by the end of episode 3 there is something more, because I mean I know we thought this about even The Boys season 2. They put that up with 3 episodes at the start, and that was very much okay. By the end of that 3rd episode, it was like, okay, I see what they're doing. We were much more into it as a season. So I'm hopeful that it's got this. That had a bit more benefit of the doubt because it was season 2.
Now, obviously, like I have a taste that this show does not adhere to by any means. I just don't like a lot of the concepts it's dealing with. A lot of it just makes me groan and eye roll and all the rest of it. I would trying to look at it somewhat objectively though. It does feel very generic to me in terms of what it is doing. It feels like basic fantasy kind of village. There's a threat coming. There's a chosen one. Even like the monologue at the end, which is like, this is a beginning. The journey has just begun. Kind of like all of it feels very and this is and like you say, I tend to nope out a fantasy pretty quickly. But even to me, like this episode felt like just like a checklist of everything that fantasy is.
Yeah. The thing is, this is fantasy from the early 90s, so it's pretty well established into the genre, but also still fairly early by today's standards of TV adaptations.
Things weren't being turned on their heads quite yet.
At least, as far as I know, not right away. Maybe as the series went on, maybe it got more, I don't want to say experimental, but more unique. It's like I said, it is pretty beloved, I assume, for a reason. But I don't know. Maybe this show has more to offer as it goes on. I'm definitely going to watch the first 3 episodes and see from there, because even generic fantasy trash, as you would call it, does appeal to me. So even if it doesn't grow from that, I will probably still find enjoyment in it because I don't think this is bad.
I don't think I ever
think it's a bit generic.
I don't think I ever called it generic factory trash. I think you're mixing this up because when we talked about K-Boy Bebop, I called that generic anime trash. I think you're mixing up my insults here.
Do you know what? You call a lot of things trash.
A lot of things are trash. There's a lot of trash in the world. That's just.
I don't disagree. I just think the things that are trash are different to what you think the things that trash are.
I'll say spoilers just so we can talk about a couple of specific details that I would say are kind of spoilery. So spoilers from here on out. So the character we said was defined by something later on in the episode. His thing is that
I want to say his name's Farron.
Could be right. He accidentally kills his girlfriend. When they're trying to fight all the Trollocs, he swings his axe around sort of in mid-rage and it hits her and it's like this sort of like, oh no, my baby, she's bleeding out, and he's like distraught. So clearly he seemed like a very sort of friendly, likable character. I suspect he might be like a moody bastard because he accidentally killed someone.
Drawn, yeah. Bit moody, yeah. I think that could be interesting to explore. I think when I said I had a good grasp on the characters in general, he actually became quite interesting to me by the end because I think he is so different from the rest. He was clearly more mature than all the others. I don't know if it was his girlfriend, if they were married. I'm not entirely sure, but it felt like that they'd been together a while. This was someone he cared about quite deeply. This wasn't just some new relationship like we're kind of mostly seeing with the other two out of the four. So that kind of set him apart from all the rest of them.
That relationship wasn't new. Because he mentioned his dad mentioned even that when you were younger. So presumably,
I say new in the serious adult sense. It still feels relatively fresh.
Because it sounds like they've been courting each other since they were teenagers at the very least.
Yeah. I think they've been kind of like very young adult kind of. I think from those sorts of movies is kind of the vibe I got from them, where it's still like, yeah, there's been a thing for a while, but I don't feel like there was much of a real relationship yet. I could be wrong, but that was kind of the vibe I got from it. Whereas, this guy clearly, this was a real relationship for probably years at this point.
The only other thing I guess is worth mentioning, spoiler-wise, honestly, is I guess it's not really a spoiler because he's on the poster, but there's like a sort of Voldemort dude in a hood on a horse that we see a couple of times. He seems to be the one who's sort of like sending in the Trollocs. So I presume he's like the big bad's like right hand man or something.
The mouth of Sauron to equate to Lord of the Rings fans.
Sure.
He wasn't really in the movies. I think he was only in the extended edition.
But he had a look. Yeah, actually, that was one of the moments that I thought was this is not him, but thinking of hoods. Is when Rosamund Pike first shows up in the village and she goes out of the tavern and everyone sort of stops and stares. It's not actually her at first, it's actually the bodyguard dude, right? So her guy goes in first and he just kind of stands there with his head looking down, so it's just the hood. And it felt kind of cheesy, this moment to me.
That was a moment where I felt, because I get exactly where you're coming from with this, I felt this is the filmmakers, this is someone who loved Lord of the Rings, the movies. Because it felt like that early stuff with Aragorn, when he was going by Strider, introduced early on, in those movies, where they didn't really know who he was. He was this kind of, figure just sitting, he was sat with a hood up, just, it had that same kind of feeling to it. But I don't know. He seemed like a cool enough guy. Maybe he gets to pull it off. He gets to pull off where, in the cool pose in the doorway.
Sure. I'm trying to think, his character reminded me of someone, because all he really does is constantly tell Rosamund Pike that it's too dangerous and they have to go. That's all he really, other than fighting, that's all he does. He's constantly saying, no, we have to go now. No, it's dangerous. We have to go now. No, it's time to move. Like, that's all he really does. And he was reminding me of another character in something else, and I can't think of what it is, but there's definitely someone he's reminding me of. And his function, in terms of like, all he seems to do is like be the annoying bodyguard who's constantly tell him that whoever he's working for to move.
Specifically bodyguard,
or something akin to like, a second in command or something like that.
Okay.
And
I can't think of a specific example, but it feels like a pretty generic role, like that part in general.
Yeah. So I don't know. The Trollocs, like there was times when they looked alright, and then there was times where the CG was kind of really.
Depending on the lighting a lot, didn't it?
It was the lighting. It kind of felt like the sort of thing where some of this could be a bit more practical. It doesn't feel. I don't really feel like there's a reason why it shouldn't be. In fact, speaking of practical, this is. So there's a scene where they're having a bath together, right? Pike and her bodyguard, and I mean, I don't really have any comment. I mean, maybe this is just normal. They have baths together, whatever. Who cares? But it shows off part of her power because he says the water's not quite warm enough, and she uses her powers to heat it up. And what bugged me about this is that the steam is CG, and I'm like, you couldn't have got some steam. You couldn't have put some actual freaking steam into the scene. And it looks bad. Like, it looks CG steam. Yeah. You can tell the whole time.
I will give you this one because steam is cheap.
Boil a kettle. Have a kettle next to the goddamn bathtub and just boil it.
Just top it up over the top.
Yeah.
It'll last long enough.
But instead we get this CG mist applied to the scene, and it just it makes it look cheap because it just like crap CG makes things look cheap. It just does.
It does, and that it's frustrating when there's no need for it, especially, right?
Like I get sometimes, like as much as I prefer practical blood, I get that having to clean up a set for multiple takes every time you do a take, there's a reason why something like CG blood is used more and more in certain stuff.
And
I get
as a
it.
rule, is looking better and better as it goes on.
But this is Steam. You can do Steam, and it's not going like.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know what the excuse for this is, other than someone forgot.
Like, because I presume the water's actually still pleasantly warm anyway, because they've got the two actors sitting in it. You assume that they made it.
It's not going to be freezing, is it? It's going to be okay.
Like, I mean, and it's not like people haven't shot scenes with steamy atmospheres before. Like, are you telling me, oh no, our lenses were steaming up, so we can't use real steam? We have to, like, well, other movies in the past have gotten around this, so I presume there's some sort of lens protector that you can use to.
Yeah,
to
this is a presumably long fixed problem.
Yes.
Like decades.
I have seen many a scene in a classic movie in a sauna. Like, they clearly have a way of doing it. It's fine.
Yeah. Because that was my first thought as well. When we do this, like, is it to do with the camera, the lens? What, you know, like, no, surely not. This has been done more times than I can count.
I mean, maybe there is like a practical thing where the shots can only, or the takes can only last so long because the steam does eventually affect the lens, but still, just do it.
It wasn't that long a scene, especially from the point where it adds up, right? You know,
yeah.
From where it heats up with where you'd need the steam. There's not that much left of it.
It's one of these things. It's one of these little things. I'm like, this just made this look worse for no reason.
Someone forgot to bring the kettle in, and they couldn't be bothered to go nip into the shop to buy one, and they're like, forget it, CG it in later, we'll fix it in post.
Yeah, I joked that they were shooting on location up a mountain, and that's why they couldn't just go and buy a kettle. But I mean, this is probably on a soundstage because it's an interior, so
yeah, exactly.
They'll be in the middle of somewhere relatively urban. They've got no excuse.
Yeah. This was definitely someone yelling, "Don't worry about it. We'll fix it in post," and they did not fix it in post.
Hey, I remember making student films. The phrase "we'll fix it in the edit" was uttered many a time.
Yeah, every time I recorded anything, you know, and any musicians, it was, oh, fix it in post. It's terrible practice. It's never go with that attitude. It's awful. Just say it, and you know this. You know that. Be fine. Fix it in post.
Oh dear. Well, that's real time. I have nothing else to.
Yeah, I thought it was okay. I didn't love it. I enjoyed it enough because I'm a sucker for the genre that I'm going to watch episodes 2 and 3 and, you know, reassess after that if I'm going to be coming back weekly.
Yeah, I was just super bored. I mean, that's all it boils down to. Is I didn't care about anything that was going on. The characters were fairly one note thus far, and like the greater story that it's setting up, I don't think nothing feels unique about it, and nothing was presented. And, you know, one of the things I hinted at earlier was the Trollocs Like, this is a classic example of like having just 2 or 3 of them that are really scary. I think would have been way more effective than an army of them that are just like being taken out in like a big soldier fight.
I actually agree, because at the start of this big scene where I thought it was just the one of them, I was like, oh, okay, you know, and then I'm like, oh, there's a group, and then they got less interesting the more of them there was. Because, you know, when it was just one and it was scary, I was like, oh, because this is a tiny village. They're not, as a rule, they don't seem to be like, you know, full of fighters. You know, they're like, you know, farmers and blacksmiths and whatever. You know, they're just generic regular peasants, and you know, seeing them take on just this one monster would have been interesting. But then there's like 10 of them, and then there's an army, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, there's like any kind of like atmosphere or menace that it was trying to have with those just kind of went away very quickly.
It was the sort of thing that once we needed Rosamund Pike's character to save them and, you know, pull out the action, you had to have a lot of them there for it to be needing powers. But by the time we've had too many of them there already, it's like it's kind of lost its effect. So.
Yeah, she pulls the Home Alone 2 tactic. She throws some bricks at them.
Oh, yeah, a lot of bricks.
Yes. I say bricks, it's more like stones because it's like old stone houses and buildings, but you know what I mean. Close enough.
They're just bricks by another name.
Yeah. All right, there you go. That's the Real Italian Pilot. Watch it if you want. I don't care.
I'd say if you like fantasy stuff, you're probably safe to watch it. If you don't, this isn't going to change your mind.
No. It's fantasy 101, and all of the good but mostly bad that comes with that. So sure. There you go. Let us know what you think of the episode, and indeed the first 3 episodes if you've watched them all, in the comments below. You can like and subscribe, all that stuff. Get us on the Twitters at mail_fuzz for channel updates. If you want to support the show financially, you can head over to patreon.com/mailfuzztv and support us for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your trouble. But otherwise, that is us, so thank you once again. We'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?